How does one superbly ignore 6 to 10 million deaths pretending not to see them? What did these populations do to live through such hell in the general indifference of what is called the international community?
I am sure my mother and sister's bodies are here.
I checked the morgue and the churches and they are not there.
Look, we are taking them all outside.
They were right in this part.
This is my dear sister.
You can see her beautifully intricate braids.
This is my sister, but they have already taken my mother outside.
What explains our indifference to the hell that these women, these children, these elderly, these young people lived through, mutilated, raped, even buried alive as they are going to be? These young people whose images of their execution I cannot show, to the end as it is so unbearable and inhuman. Yet the executors, the killers of M23, shamelessly film their crime with pleasure since they know they have nothing to fear. Their sponsors protect them, and no one seems interested in these wretched of the earth anyway.
In the east of Congo, in Kivu, at the border with Rwanda, the war has caused about 6 million deaths. Some even estimate that half of these deaths are children. Can you imagine?
Women and children are the first victims of this war of aggression from Rwanda and Uganda.
Nowhere in the world is the violence as fierce, so intense that for once I feel increasingly guilty for not showing the raw images so that everyone can consciously grasp the extent of the barbarity taking place in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo. I even forced myself to publish some of them on the AFO Media app so that sensitive souls can voluntarily go there to grasp the magnitude of the tragedy.
The UN recorded more than 90,000 cases of sexual violence related to the conflict in North Kivu in 2023. And that's a figure for just 1 year. And for the whole of Congo, the UN published figures of 123,000 rapes and gender-based violence. In the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which represents a woman being raped every 4 minutes.
Figures that send chills down the spine and do not prevent the great powers from continuing to deal with the barbarians. Women raped and coldly murdered in front of their children and husbands, men with their heads cut off. Babies taken out of incubators, killed and dismembered in maternity wards in front of their crying mothers.
For nearly 3 decades now, reluctantly, I have been treating the consequences of the atrocious war that mourns the east of the Democratic Republic of the Congo in a climate of impunity and silence from the international community.
Here we have received many civilians, and we have received many with abdominal injuries. In the abdomen, in the thorax, and in the head. The hospital, Project Hospital, has never experienced such an influx of injured people.
Soon, we will run out of stock because we do not have enough supplies.
We do not have enough supplies.
The barbarity is reaching new heights.
I have seen children taken because they were raped.
Little girls of 1 year old.
I put hands on my head. My God, it's my 4th child. Seeing him dead. Lord, what am I going to do? This ongoing M23 war has come to me to Goma.
When the M23 entered the village, we heard gunshots. 2 children went outside. They were killed. The situation became increasingly dangerous and unpredictable, which is precisely why we made the decision to leave and seek safety elsewhere, ensuring our well-being. One was 18 years old and the other 10 years old.
Fighters scalped and their heads presented as trophies. Ritual crimes filmed, posted on social media.
No community should have to endure such suffering.
Imagine for a second the reaction of Westerners if the Russians had done the same thing when they invaded Ukraine. What crime have the Congolese committed for their tragedy to be ignored, treated with contempt?
For 30 years we've been victims of war and have not acted.
Today the youth are standing up to be on the front line.
We are going to mobilize.
How long will the world accept this imposture without saying anything? Are they also human or subhuman? Why do these populations not deserve the same attention as those in other regions of the world?
The Rwandan Defense Forces, in support of their M23 puppets and allies, continue their terrorist enterprise on our territory, sowing terror and desolation among our populations.
With the help of Rwanda, this group now occupies part of the Congolese territory.
5 per million dead, hundreds of thousands displaced, 1 million refugees in Goma, and an overwhelming responsibility pointing at Rwanda present in the east of Congo with its army. And what is Belgium doing? Nothing. Nothing. Why this double standard?
In Ukraine, intervention was immediate by voting for sanctions, providing military support. Weapons are supplied, but nothing for Congo.
Here, the Rwandan army could not afford this without the support of American imperialism. Without the support of the US, it's impossible. You know it. You know it. You look down because you know it. A small country like that indeed cannot intervene with its neighbor without significant Western support.
With every action of the militias, with every tragedy, a condemnation, a support, and nothing more. With the capture of Goma by the M23, we reach a tipping point. Once again, there was only support for the DRC and a condemnation of the M23 and Rwanda. Yesterday, our embassy in Kinshasa and several others were the targets of unacceptable attacks. However, these condemnable acts speak volumes about the perception by local opinion of the inaction of the international community in the face of war crimes committed in the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
Congo is too far away. Ukraine is nearby. They are our neighbors. It's much easier. Then there's Rwanda. The Rwandans are serious people who are considered stable partners. It's an authoritarian regime with a president elected by 99% of the votes, but a stable regime. Belligerent but stable, because above all, we need gold, diamonds, cobalt, coltan. Yes, I dare say it, Mr. Minister, we have remained silent.
I would like to directly call upon the international community and the African Union here. Rwanda continues to openly and unscrupulously violate the fundamental principles of the United Nations Charter, as well as regional agreements. Worse, these actions take place in total impunity, and this with a blatant disregard for international rules and the values that these institutions are supposed to defend.
And when Russia invades Ukraine, the European Union talks about international law, rightly so. But when its Rwandan ally violates Congolese sovereignty, commits massacres and supports it, just like when Israel occupies Palestine, Lebanon, Syria, the European Union sides with the aggressor.
And this is not the first time, literally. The Rwandans are indeed repeating the bombing of refugee camps, and the world remains silent.
Once again, Rwanda, through its M23 puppets, has taken the city of Goma. Yet another occupation that was indeed expected since they had been besieging the mining town for some time already.
The M23 has gradually encircled Goma since 2024 and indeed controlled the two main access roads to the north and west of the city of Goma for several months now.
At the time I am recording this commentary, despite the ceasefire, the M23 troops continue their relentless advance towards the other mining town, that of South Kivu, bordering Rwanda, Bukavu. And with the same bad faith, the Rwandan president pretends not to be behind this new capture of Goma.
M23 are not Rwandans, please. These are Congolese.
The argument has been the same for decades. For him, the soldiers who took Goma are not Rwandans, but indeed Congolese. There is no question of acknowledging his support for those who hold Goma today.
You have the whole international community just confused. They talked about Rwanda, they talked about the Nairobi process. Honestly, even here, maybe you will help me understand what all this means.
Oh, come on. This time, unlike previous occupations, the images and testimonies have circulated widely. It must be said that the Rwandan troops entering Goma did not go unnoticed. No one is fooled anymore.
Sacrificing the Congolese people, killing millions of people, under the pretext that there is a threat. Can't this be resolved without shedding innocent blood?
Even traditional allies under pressure are distancing themselves, at least officially. The issue is far too significant.
France strongly condemns the offensive led by the M23 and supported by the Rwandan armed forces.
It undermines the territorial integrity and sovereignty of the Congo. It worsens a humanitarian crisis that is already the second most severe on the entire planet, having caused more than 400,000 displacements of people since the beginning of the year, after the 2 million people displaced last year, and putting a strain on UN forces. The MONUSCO, which is on site protecting civilian populations, and of which 3 peacekeepers have already paid with their lives for their commitment to protection.
A situation sufficiently embarrassing for Paris, forced to condemn its main ally. In the sub-region, there are quite a few personalities from around the world denouncing this show of force. This occupation of Goma, he often a model of the development of his country, must face his reality, the lies he has sold so far, with some success.
Mr. Minister, we condemn, but the essential is missing. That is to say that, just to remind you, the European Union finances the Rwandan army to the tune of 20 million to intervene in Mozambique.
Without any guarantee or control that this funding does not go elsewhere, a United Nations expert group found that in 2023, Rwanda recorded an unprecedented increase in its coltan exports, an increase of 50% compared to the previous year. And each month, for example, the M23 smuggles 150 tons of coltan from the Congolese locality of Rubaya, occupied by them, to Rwanda. It is an unparalleled plundering.
5.4 million deaths, hundreds of thousands of displaced people, 1 million refugees in Goma, and an overwhelming responsibility pointing to Rwanda, present in eastern Congo with its army.
He clearly did not expect such an outcry. His response is so unconvincing that one is surprised it comes from him, traditionally very comfortable in front of the press with striking arguments.
Today, on the 3rd of February, does Rwanda currently have any troops at all in eastern DRC?
I don't know.
You're the commander-in-chief.
Yeah, there are many things I don't know.
Admit that it's a bit much for someone who inspires so much admiration from many Africans. He doesn't know if his soldiers are on Congolese soil. This response, this discomfort, essentially comes from the fact that the images of Rwandan soldiers following the M23 have circulated so much that it becomes ridiculous to deny it, especially since all this involvement is extensively documented by international institutions, notably the United Nations, which are on the ground.
Independent reports from various NGOs and even credible Western intelligence agencies from multiple sources have clearly documented Rwanda's direct support to the M23, including military assistance, such as logistical support and coordination efforts.
The United Nations has indeed found that Rwanda not only delivers weapons or money, but also brings soldiers on site. The Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, has also called on the Rwandan regime of Kagame to stop supporting the M23 and to withdraw from the territory of the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
So, but we must to make sure we survive any storm that blows across our country.
One would almost take him for the victim. This umpteenth invasion further exposes the face of this character, who over the past 30 years has been one of the best communicators on the planet. There are millions of Africans who praise the management of his country by this military man who came to power. Under troubled conditions in 1994, in the wake of what the world called the Rwandan Tutsi genocide, there are hundreds of thousands who point to his management as an example for other African leaders. So much so that Captain Paul Kagame has transformed the face of his country into an El Dorado where many Africans now travel almost as if on a pilgrimage. Investments are significant in the fields of education, health, infrastructure, and technology. It's hard not to admire the transformation of Rwanda over the last 3 decades. A facade that well illustrates this desire for transformation. Like a phoenix rising from its ashes, Kigali has overcome its dark past to become one of the most attractive and safest cities in Africa, as well as one of Rwanda's prides. But more ingeniously, the Rwandan president has been accompanied by powerful English communication firms that polish his image and make him more popular, cleaner. With a highly appreciated presence in major football stadiums alongside the most prestigious teams, with the famous concept Visit Rwanda, Rwanda sponsor of major football clubs, Paris Saint-Germain, Arsenal, Bayern Munich, Such big, such grand spaces. Rwanda makes you want to visit. A success story that unfortunately masks a true tragedy. The flip side of the picture is very dark. I find it a bit difficult to undermine this positive image of Africa that it has managed to convey around the world, but we cannot for a single moment consider sacrificing millions of lives for the sole reason of saving the image of a country and a man. We must stop this imposture that costs dearly in human lives and that hides a strong collaboration with the European colonizer and the Western imperialism to which we claim to be opposed.
The only president I love in Africa is President of Rwanda, Mr. Kagame. He has made a lot of developments in Rwanda.
What is the truth? Kagame, a genius or a demon? To develop his country, President Paul Kagame, in office since 1994, already 31 years, aware of the poverty of his land of 14 million inhabitants over just over 26,000 square kilometers. That is to say, a density of 445 inhabitants per square kilometer made the cynical, strategic, cold choice to do like the Westerners by taking his share of minerals by force from his immense neighbor who has them in abundance. In reality, to truly understand this absurd situation in the east of the DRC, which pits a giant the size of the European Union, a little David whose area is not even that of the capital Kinshasa, it is absolutely necessary, I would say as usual in this type of situation, to rely on history. It enlightens us much better. I will spare you from going back to the beginning of the 20th century, where after Germany's defeat in World War I in 1917, its colonies were divided among the victors. Thus, while Togo and Cameroon were handed over to France and Great Britain, Rwanda and Urundi were handed over to Belgium, which would first merge them with Congo. Going back to that period would be far too lengthy. We will content ourselves with going back only to 1997, since here history seems to be repeating itself. You can also relive in detail this history of Congo in the African Archives box set dedicated to Laurent Désiré Kabila. It goes back in time and provides a better understanding of what has been happening since the independence in this region of Eastern Congo. You can obtain it on the platforms AFO Media.
Toute l'idée était de réunir tous ces Zaïrois qui venaient d'endroits différents, avec des histoires différentes, et de trouver un moyen qu'ils fassent cause commune. On voulait essayer de les impliquer ensemble dans une sorte de mouvement politique organisé, capable d'articuler un programme et même de justifier la guerre qui commençait au Zaïre.
Mais entre eux, ils ne se connaissaient pas. Il fallait donc qu'un Rwandais qui les connaisse soit présent à leur première rencontre pour faire les présentations.
That day, in the offices of James Kabarebe on a particularly busy afternoon, I was the first to arrive alongside my ADP team. And then, suddenly and unexpectedly, a military jeep arrived in the distance, slowly with a loud rumble, and parked nearby. Two men, both wearing uniforms, stepped out and looked around cautiously. Firstly, it was Kabila. Initially, it was the first time I saw him in person. I saw a man who was wearing sandals. An old man who appeared to be slightly limping, with a completely shaved head. But I told myself, that's Kabila.
Je les ai présentés un par un. Et j'ai introduit l'ordre du jour, c'est-à-dire la libération du Zaïre et la guerre contre Mobutu.
In 1997, when President Paul Kagame and his Ugandan counterpart Yoweri Museveni chose Laurent Désiré Kabila to launch an assault on the regime of the founding president, Mobutu Sese Seko Kukumbendu Wazabange. Officially, the main objective for the two heads of state was to secure their borders, where a significant number of genocidaires had taken refuge. The former FAR, the Rwandan Armed Forces, the infamous FDLR, but also the refugees who survived the massacres in the camps at the Rwandan border. So, the first goal is to secure the entire stretch of the eastern border. Relentless advance of AFDL towards Kinshasa, crossing the entire east of the country, winning victory after victory, will significantly change the objectives. The Rwandan leaders encounter in this region an extraordinary trafficking network that already existed and was run by adventurers of all kinds from all over the world. They will also join the table. The region is particularly rich in minerals. It must take advantage of. This is indeed one of the reasons that, starting in 1998, will divide the allies of the conquest of power in Kinshasa.
Until a certain point, Memzi said, "Here, you return. We pay what we owe."
In fact, when Mzi first asked, it was to the Angolans. Without them making a single mistake, without them claiming a single centimeter of the Congolese portion, a single centimeter of the mines, the Angolans left. They were Congolese children, tigers, nationalized as Congolese. They left. Only a part remained. But the Rwandans continued to kill. I remember I was just nearby here. A plot to kill Mzi long before. We disarmed them at 4 a.m. We point bazookas. We take all of that. Then Mzi said, "You gentlemen go back."
And it was indeed me, specifically whom Mzi sent to go see Kagame in Rwanda. I went to see President Kagame, and I remember I was with Kazadi Nyembwe. I told him, Mzi would like your army to return. He told me, but I've always said that to Mzi. But it was he who insisted that he could reach Kinshasa.
Between Kigali and Kinshasa in the year 1999, nothing is going well. And President Laurent Désiré Kabila, who has had enough of the violent, arrogant, and predatory behavior, ex-guards, will no longer hold back in denouncing the plundering of his country. He will even go directly to Kigali to express his dissatisfaction.
Congo is currently being bled dry. Fraudsters are smuggling hundreds of kilos of gold, approximately per week, passing through Rwanda and its beauty. To the outside, we have woven bonds of friendship and brotherhood. But friendship must always be maintained.
The idea of a break, President Paul Kagame cannot accept it as such. Not conceivable. From now on, yesterday's allies will confront each other. Rwanda and Uganda will incite rebellions to attack the regime of Laurent Désiré Kabila. It is in this climate that the infamous M23 will be born. The Ugandan and Rwandan authorities explain their action, their aggression, by the desire to secure their borders. They accuse the DRC of harboring the Hutu rebels of the FDLR, who, according to them, make incursions into their territory, who, according to them, dream of revenge and reconquest.
Les anciens génocidaires n'étaient pas inquiétés. Ils circulaient librement. D'autres opposants à mon propre gouvernement venaient du Soudan se réfugier en toute impunité au Congo.
Somebody made a very big mistake and ordered whoever did it without order and spent some hours sharing our territory in Cyangugu and killed people. I cannot be specific about or detailed in the kind of response that is going to be, but certainly logically that means if you slap me in the face before I hit back, I go to fight. I may not hit in the face, I may hit somewhere else, so I have to think and see where I'm going to hit.
There are no rebels at the moment. I told you they are Rwandans. Do you want me to express this in what language so that you understand that they are Rwandans? These gentlemen have found too much honey here that they want to take back. They do not want to leave this country. If only they wanted to stay in this country while respecting the natives.
We are stakeholders.
Nous étions ceux qui avaient porté Kabila, et il n'était pas question que nous abandonnions le terrain.
Kagame and Museveni both simply wanted a buffer zone around their closest borders in the region of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is, for what purpose? It is not simply indeed a wall, a barrier to stem the tide of the Interahamwe who did not have the means to enter Rwanda. It was rather about natural resources.
Nous n'avions pas porté Kabila au pouvoir juste par altruisme, mais parce que nous avions des intérêts dans cette affaire.
This has the merit of being clear. He was not waging war out of altruism. It wasn't a gift, as they say in Abidjan. In short, they are going to profit from the situation, while maintaining militias, military groups along the way, that will settle on significant mining areas. And everyone knows this and lets it happen. The international community turns a blind eye.
The United States was, in its foreign policy and diplomatic efforts, too pro-Rwandan. If you spoke against the Rwandans, the Americans wouldn't listen to you, whether it was the NGOs or the politicians. No one could listen to you at that time.
In reality, Western nations at the end of the 90s were reluctant to sanction Rwanda. The feeling of guilt they feel towards it compels them to remain silent. The shadow of the 1994 genocide looms over the tragedy unfolding during those years in eastern Zaire, which has become the DRC. No one internationally dares to challenge Kigali or Kampala for this incursion, this aggression against their large neighbor. Paul Kagame's argument that managed to make them feel guilty themselves. We are pushing the FDLR, the genocidaires, away from our borders. We are fighting so it doesn't happen again. Securing our borders is vital. We are protecting ourselves from another genocide, an argument that hits the mark since no one dares to contradict it. Even when President Laurent Désiré Kabila, who until then refused to facilitate investigations into the murders and mass graves that accompanied his rise to power, comes to the table and discusses the crimes committed by his Rwandan allies. Now that the divorce is finalized, tongues are loosening. The debate focuses on Mizi's ability to lead this alliance, a somewhat intrusive one that he has installed in power, on his room for maneuver to make his supporters understand that it is time for them to let him take the reins. It is urgent to find an answer to these questions, especially as more and more the international community and human rights organizations accuse the liberation movement of hundreds of thousands of crimes committed during the conquest. During the march on Kinshasa, there is even talk of genocide.
It's truly a sad period. We lost many family members. Indeed, there is a small and peaceful village called Musekera, a small and peaceful village where I was born. So they exterminated the entire village. Everyone was exterminated. My family members, they were exterminated. And only my mother and I are left.
We didn't know everything the military was doing. We didn't know everything. Even Minzi didn't know everything.
The Rwandans, without consulting Memzi, being determined in pursuing what you call the Interahamwe, they had massacred entire villages of refugee communities, both in Equateur and in Kisangani and in the east. But the Rwandans had a somewhat unusual and unexpectedly aberrant behavior. Indeed,
we are the ones accused. Murdering Tutsi never did that. And what about those individuals they specifically deported to the city of Bukavu? Are you referring to our people? Who exactly knows where they are? Those people who are fascinated by blood love blood. He clearly said that genocide is not Congolese. It's not in our traditions.
Just remember that we buried women alive. It was like atrocious, but no one wanted to understand. No one! It's documented.
We are in 1999 and the feeling is already like that. The feeling of not being understood by the international community when they speak. Yet, the United Nations report will thoroughly document these killings, these massacres committed by the Rwandan and Ugandan forces who accompanied Laurent Désiré Kabila to power 30 years later, and dozens of rebellions sparked afterwards. We are in the same situation in the east of Congo. And what is happening today with the new aggression is still done under the same pretext. Rwanda, which in the meantime had fallen out with its Ugandan partner, has reconciled with them. And they are citing the same argument. They are protecting themselves from the active FDLR in Congo, who threaten their security.
The FDLR do not represent a very significant threat. And the other reason, which is undoubtedly more important, is indeed, in fact, the control of certain areas and certain natural resources through armed groups that actually serve as sorts of guardians or militias to control areas where there are significant commercial exchanges.
In reality, everyone is aware that the influence of the FDLR, if it exists, does not represent a real threat to Rwanda. What is at play here is very clearly linked to the mineral wealth that abounds in the subsoil of eastern DRC. This deceives no one. Rwanda is indeed clearly one of the main beneficiaries of this significant windfall and the prevailing chaos in this region. Somewhat abandoned, it must be acknowledged by the central power in Kinshasa. To the Chinese, Lebanese, Indians and other adventurers, let's be serious. When we know that Rwanda is ranked among the world's gold producers, even though it doesn't even have a gold mine. One wonders where it gets its gold from. One wonders where it gets the coltan and cobalt it sells on the global market. It's no secret to anyone, it comes entirely from the DRC. The importance of this windfall for Rwanda, which knows how to project itself better and anticipate more effectively than its large Congolese neighbor, is such that it has outright built heavy infrastructure to process its minerals, in the very methodical and pragmatic manner of President Paul Kagame. Rwanda has equipped itself with a gold refinery for $5 million. With a capacity of 6 tons per month, it has been operational since March 2019.
Rwanda has a coltan refinery today, but Rwanda does not have coltan in its soil. Rwanda is currently in the process of building a state-of-the-art gold refinery for all of southern Africa. Listen, let's be serious.
Minerals weigh heavily in the Rwandan economy. The geography of Rwanda's budget is simple.
And it is a country of extreme fragility. Approximately 50% of the budget comes from international aid. International aid, which is essentially poured in because the regime has managed to make the world feel guilty about the genocide. So this is indeed what some have called a sort of genocidal rent that the Kigali regime receives. And the other 50% comes from the plundering of resources from the Congo, from Kivu and the entire peripheral region of Kivu. Let's imagine two things. Firstly, indeed, that there is a return of a relatively strong power in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, and that Kinshasa manages to regain control of Kivu and its eastern provinces. Rwanda would lose 50% of its income overnight. And imagine there is a revolution in Rwanda. Let's imagine that the official history of the genocide is written in one way or another, and that it is not necessarily favorable to the sense of the official history as it is described and promoted by the Kigali regime. Well, Rwanda would no longer exist.
Seriously, even if one can admire the prodigious development that Rwanda is experiencing, even if one can, in some way, commend the fact that it spends these sums for the well-being of its people, it must be acknowledged that Rwanda does not generate the revenues it spends. It is precisely this image of seriousness of rigor that it projects, which makes others want to deal with it. But in truth, what develops this mountainous country is the money from blood minerals stolen from the DRC at the cost of millions of lives and displaced people.
I invite you, we'll show you where we mine coltan. But
does Rwanda export any other minerals that are smuggled from Eastern DRC?
I don't know about that, because that in any case can't be the problem.
And now, in the face of accusations, the master of Kigali points the finger at those who benefit from it. Basically, the thief also accuses the receiver without batting an eye.
People who are benefiting from minerals of Congo more than anybody else are South Africa, and these are the Europeans who are making noise about it.
The big news is that Rwanda has become, though it is known they steal minerals from their Congolese neighbor, a very official exporter of minerals, even very carefully declaring its productions on the world market. Imagine that Rwanda has become, without possessing any, the world's leading exporter of coltan. Worse, the European Union, like the Americans and other major powers, have pushed the vice so far that the old continent, although aware of the dubious origin of the minerals, has signed very official contracts with Rwanda to supply it with rare materials whose origin it is well aware of.
You said that, according to your information, the agreement with Rwanda was an exemplary agreement. I think we don't have the same readings. Allow me to remind you of the report published last June, that is to say 5 months ago by the United Nations. What does this report say? This report simply indicates that the unrest in the Kivu region is financed by Rwanda to steal materials that they sell back to us. In other words, without perhaps intending to, we are financing a fence and a criminal. So my question is very simple. The agreement says we guarantee traceability, but we guarantee nothing. Traceability is simply declarative. Mr. Sikala, I will steal your watch, and then I will sell it and say this watch is mine. Well, that's exactly what Rwanda is doing. There is absolutely nothing serious. And so I simply ask you if you are ready to modify this agreement to finally guarantee traceability, to ultimately perhaps ensure that these conflicts in Africa, which have already caused thousands of deaths, come to an end. Thank you.
In the rush for rare minerals necessary for the energy transition, we disregard all these values and morals. We deal with the looter if necessary.
the European Commission, in fact, went to sign this agreement and encouraged Rwanda to loot, to intensify the plundering of Congolese resources.
When you buy a product from a fence, you are yourself guilty of theft. No serious international observer explains that the support of Rwanda to the militias that are ravaging the east of Congo is anything other than its appetite for the mineral resources of this region. It is therefore appropriate for this Parliament to urgently call on the European Commission to finally commit to not fueling one of the worst conflicts in the world by supporting the Kigali regime that violates and plunders Congo with impunity. Just yesterday, the European Union signed an agreement with Rwanda.
An agreement on what? The sustainable management of raw materials. There we are, coltan, cobalt, nickel and diamonds such as copper. That's the reason why Belgium does not intervene. Business. Today there are memorandums of understanding between the European Union and Rwanda. The protocol on strategic minerals signed agreements favorable for the European Union and Rwanda. We help Rwanda. Agreements between the Rwandan army and European nations. And why? Why so much hypocrisy? That is indeed the question being asked today by the African peoples and by the Congolese people. It is not from Rwanda the diamond comes. It is not from Rwanda that the cobalt comes. All of this comes from the east of Congo. Despite these facts, Rwanda continues to receive international aid and support and remains a preferred partner for the world powers. All traditional Belgian parties voted against maintaining this strategic partner. Why? Business. Minerals such as cobalt, coltan, copper. Business, business, business. That's why you don't want to intervene. It is necessary to put an end to the plundering of natural resources and illegal trafficking and criminal trade of minerals from the Democratic Republic of the Congo by Rwanda, in collusion with Western and international companies.
This heartfelt plea from the Nobel laureate, a doctor tending to these mutilated women, struggles to be heard by the international community whose main interest is to secure mineral supplies for their energy transition. They clearly have no interest in the DRC being at peace. It's good for business.
We cannot talk about the energy transition without mentioning Congolese cobalt. We cannot talk about new technologies, our smartphones, our laptops and devices, without being able to talk about Congolese coltan and tantalum. It's indeed time for these resources to serve humanity. In a clean way, clearly.
Cobalt and coltan are essential minerals for European multinationals that are used, among other things, for smartphones, batteries, but are also used in the defense industry, in the transition to aeronautics. And so Kivu alone contains 60% of the world's coltan reserves. Imagine the strategic importance of this region.
And Rwanda, to whom the checkbook has been handed, to whom wars on the continent are outsourced, at a time when Europe is at its worst, is tasked with the dirty work. That's why it is accelerating the occupation of this particularly rich area in the east of Congo, which must supply the material to sell. Imagine that the Rubaya mine in the Masisi territory in North Kivu, where we visited 2 years ago, is the most productive coltan mine in the world, with its 120 tons per month. It is now held by the Rwandan forces, the M23. It supplies coltan with secondary substances, such as cassiterite, wolfram, gold and rare earths. This mine brings in at least $800,000 per month.
It is estimated that the majority of its funding comes from the taxes it levies on minerals, approximately $800,000 per month. So it constitutes the financial core of the M23, plus, of course, other various and diverse resources.
In Walikale, where we have also now arrived, now in the hands of the M23, you can find gold, niobium, very rare and absolutely essential minerals in the precision armament industry, thorium, tantalum and rare earths. These are particularly lucrative spoils of war that Rwanda now holds on the soil of the DRC. These minerals need to be secured, which have more or less already been engaged right under the owner's nose. An invaluable source of income.
In February 2024, the European Commission will sign this agreement on raw materials with Rwanda. And barely 2 months later, in April 2024, the M23 occupies the locality of Rubaya, which represents 15% of the world's coltan production, a strategic mineral. Every month today, 150 tons of coltan are transported from there to Rwanda, likely into the hands of multinationals.
So many are wondering how a small country like Rwanda, whose area is not even that of Kinshasa, can thus give a hard time to the great Democratic Congo, whose area is larger than that of the European Union. This is the great paradox.
Rwanda is neither a nuclear nor a military power. It is more than just that. Congo is in a state of weakness, an organized chaos for 3 decades.
It's not just a matter between Congo and Rwanda. It's that Rwanda receives support from the West, from the United States, but also from Europe. Each year, the European Union offers, for example, tens of millions in aid to the Rwandan army. Poland has even promised all the weapons, all the military technologies that the regime would need. And as part of the Global Gateway program, Europe has promised investments of 900 million to Rwanda. And the icing on the cake, in February 2024, the European Union signed a privileged memorandum of understanding on raw materials with Rwanda.
How is this possible? When Russia invades Ukraine, rightly so, there is condemnation. There are sanctions, there are arms deliveries to Ukraine. But when it comes to the Democratic Republic of the Congo, nothing. We do not help. Is the life of a Congolese not worth the life of a Ukrainian? Is the life of a Congolese woman not worth the life of a Ukrainian woman? This is the question that all the people of Africa are asking. Why this double standard? The Rwandan army could not afford to do this. Without the support of American imperialism, without the support of the US, it's impossible, you know it? You know it. You look down because you know it. A small country like that cannot intervene with its neighbor without significant Western support.
In truth, Kigali, for reasons we mentioned a little earlier, benefits from almost blind support from the international community, which clearly prefers to deal with Paul Kagame rather than with Kinshasa. Paul Kagame, with his methodical and determined demeanor, knows how to handle things.
When are we finally going to support the Congolese people? Support the territorial integrity of this country, not apply double standards. When it suits us, we turn a blind eye because there's money involved. And when it doesn't suit us, we intervene as well because, again, there's money involved. Human rights are not a matter of convenience. So isn't it time, Mr. Minister, to get to the heart and root of the problem, that is to finally impose targeted sanctions against the M23 and especially against the 2 countries that support and arm it for far too long, namely Uganda and Rwanda.
If we fail to respond decisively, we will not only betray the people of Congo, but also weaken Europe's own strategic interests.
Until when will Rwanda continue to abuse your respect and your authority?
I am relaying, and I do so on behalf of 95 Francophone parliaments, the solemn call for sanctions. It would indeed be an honor for France to lead the demand for sanctions against Uganda and Rwanda. It would be its honor.
You will have noticed the reluctance of the major European powers, in particular, to impose sanctions against the Kigali regime. It's not enough to condemn with mere lip service. It's about adopting measures to put an end to this aggression. We are far from that at the moment. It only took Russia crossing the border into Ukraine for the major powers to bring out the heavy artillery to rush to Ukraine's aid. They are deploying all strategies to calm Moscow's fervor.
In the Financial Times, expert Jason Stearns is clear this war could end relatively quickly. He recalls that in 2012, the M23 was defeated. And it wasn't just because of the action of the Congolese army and its southern allies who had militarily defeated the M23. It was also because international supporters of the Rwandan regime had suspended its funding. And so they had said, because of the role you are playing in Congo, we will no longer fund you. Barack Obama had called Kagame to tell him to stop the M23. In other words, if the West were not sponsoring this war today, it could indeed end very quickly. And we could have already avoided many of these deaths, many of these innocent victims today in Congo.
We are far from that option, which would consist of coming to the aid of the DRC.
The situation in the Democratic Republic of the Congo is getting worse, even though President John Lorenzo has been mediating
the conflict between Rwanda and the Democratic Republic of the Congo because he wants to bring peace and stability. The situation is really bad right now. I want to hear from Ms. President if you have any plan in the future to bring peace in the Democratic Republic of the Congo.
You're asking me a question about Rwanda, and it is a very serious problem, I agree, but I don't think it's appropriate right now to talk about it, but it is a very serious problem.
The American president prefers to sidestep the issue. It's not on the agenda. He prefers to prioritize at the same time on the project of his friend Elon Musk, who convinced him to put pressure on South Africa so that land can be returned to the white farmers of South Africa from where the head of X originates. The richest man in the world, nostalgic for the apartheid era. In utter absurdity, South Africa is immediately placed under American sanctions. Meanwhile, the Congolese issue is splendidly ignored. This illustrates the injustice that Congo suffers due to its wealth. It's difficult for me, who doesn't believe in the curse of the subsoil, to see how it can sometimes represent a real source of instability. So many indicators suggest that a stable and peaceful DRC is not a priority for the major Western powers.
The war, massacres, and destabilization in the east of Congo benefit those who want to steal the natural resources, the raw materials of Congo.
For minerals, Mr. Minister, yes, you heard me correctly. So that we can drive our beautiful electric cars, so that we can use our smartphones.
There are those who dream of permanently occupying the east of Congo by dividing Congo into small pieces. This is commonly referred to as balkanization to better steal the wealth and resources of Congo for the benefit of Western multinationals.
Western powers do not think about your happiness, they only think about one thing, which is the exploitation of your subsoil.
We should grow, we should work with each other, we should work together to fulfill this dream of our continent. I was born here, I grew up in Uganda, my wife was born in Burundi, we met in Kenya, and we are here. So, Africans, that's who we are. We are brothers, we are sisters. We are each other. I am you, you are me.
But how can the champion of Pan-Africanism, the one who established the AfCFTA, the African Continental Free Trade Area, who abolished visas for Africans coming to Rwanda, who at every opportunity denounced the imperialist attitude of the West, become their servant in this sub-region? How did he become the one who signs contracts with the European Union to plunder his neighbor and weaken Africa? How did the one who put Rwanda on the world map become the gunman for the Europeans, waging wars for them by proxy on his continent? In the Central African Republic, where he keeps the president in check, and in Mozambique, where he fights the Islamists at great expense on behalf of the Westerners. This indeed seriously questions us. How can we believe in his sincerity now? But one thing is certain. He has signed a contract to sell minerals he does not possess, which means he will inevitably plunder them from his neighbor. But if Rwanda and Uganda find it so easy to appropriate Congo's minerals, it's not just the fault of others. The internal issues within the country are deep. One sometimes wonders if the many Congolese citizens, to use the expression preferred by the former founding president Mobutu, truly love their country. Foreign nations that destabilize the DRC always rely on nationals to do so, due to their greed, their fratricidal hatred, but also their thirst for power. It is always on them that one relies to destabilize their country and divide it into small pieces.
We will continue the steady march of liberation all the way to Kinshasa. Dear beloved citizens of this beautiful city of Goma, do you kindly want us to stop here? Where do you perhaps want us to go? Kinshasa.
Bis repetita. History repeats itself. It feels like hearing Laurent Désiré Kabila, who took the same city in 1996 at the head of the very eclectic AFDL, which, due to a misunderstanding, led him all the way to Kinshasa. It was still an army entirely constituted by Kigali and Kampala.
Mais entre eux, ils ne se connaissaient pas. Il fallait donc qu'un Rwandais qui les connaisse soit présent à leur première rencontre pour faire les présentations.
J'ai vu un homme qui était en sandales.
un vieux, mais qui semblait boiter, avec une tête rasée. Mais je me suis dit, c'est lui, Kabila.
Je les ai présentés un par un. Et j'ai introduit l'ordre du jour, c'est-à-dire la libération du Zaïre et la guerre contre Mobutu.
Sometime after taking power, it was observed that he would discover the cost of compromising with the Rwandan ally.
Goma is currently occupied. Bukavu by the rebels. As you can see, there are no rebels. I told you that they are Rwandans. In what language do you want me to say it, so that you understand that they are Rwandans? These gentlemen have found so much honey here that they want to come back. They do not want to leave this country. If only they really, truly, and genuinely wanted to stay in this beautiful and wonderful country while respecting the natives wholeheartedly and sincerely. We would quite easily accept them. But they come as conquerors indeed.
Sometime later, he would pay for this alliance with his life. He is assassinated in his office. And alliances of this kind are numerous in the vast entity that is the DRC. Jean-Pierre Bemba, in his time, would ally with Uganda within the MLC, which would lead to an epic battle against the Rwandans on Congolese soil. Another example of this alliance with foreigners to destabilize their own country, Alexis Ntambe Mwamba, who would lead the RCD Goma, again supported and armed by Rwanda. Wamba Dia Wamba was supported in his time by Rwanda and then Uganda. The list is long and goes far back in time. Remember the Katangese gendarmes supported by Angola. It is almost a constant in the Congolese political landscape, which is essentially composed of former rebels who have worked with Rwanda, Uganda, or Angola. And despite the setbacks, they do not seem to learn from them. President Felix Tshisekedi stands out as an exception in this landscape, as he is certainly one of the few who has not been in a rebellion or in dealings with Rwanda. With him, they are rather in the minority. The Vital Kamerhe, Moise Katumbi, Augustin Matata Ponyo, the main leaders who have not compromised with Rwanda or Uganda are those. It is therefore very often with the complicity of the Congolese that the DRC is destabilized. Thomas Lubanga, who operated with his UPC funded by Rwanda, has just joined Corneille Nanga's AFC, which holds Goma with his group Zaire. In short, everything always happens with the active complicity of Congolese who act against their country. This always leads President Paul Kagame to say that it is Congolese fighting among themselves.
M23 are not Rwandans. These are Congolese.
Which is not true, since they are always under the command of Rwandan soldiers and officers on the ground.
We have Rwandan communities in Congo who are Congolese. And by the way, these are not just Tutsis. It is the same social structure of a country that is also there in Congo. Like, in fact, we have other neighboring countries where they are, but they are citizens of those countries.
A very often repeated argument that somewhat poorly conceals the real aim of the presence of the Rwandan army on Congolese soil. Another responsibility of the Congolese is the endemic corruption, particularly within the army. If it is proven that the Kinshasa government has, over the past 3 years, spent enormous sums to equip its army and improve the soldiers' conditions, it is evident that this money was not used for that purpose. We are talking about more than $2 billion. When we look at the state of this army and the conditions in which the troops live and fight, it's clearly obvious that corruption in the chains of command has significantly diverted this money. With a bit of will and seriousness, this army would have been capable of defending the integrity of the territory. That's why after this debacle, which has seriously affected the Congolese, after this great humiliation, the people are eagerly awaiting the results of the investigations conducted by President Felix Tshisekedi to find out how colossal sums were actually spent. It is evident that the Commander-in-Chief must also question his share of responsibility in this debacle. Certainly, he shows a real willingness to put an end to this instability in the East, but the result does not seem to prove him right. A leader is always accountable for the results of his team. He must take responsibility for both victories and failures. The impunity enjoyed by some embezzlers, the endemic corruption of certain army officials, the reshuffling of some collaborators, the choice of entourage should perhaps be questioned by him to facilitate dialogue with all parties. In the face of such a setback, and the advance of the M23 supported by Rwanda in the eastern region. The leader must urgently question what is not working in his setup. If the adversary continues to advance without much difficulty, it clearly indicates that something is wrong with his strategy. And it is the role of the commander-in-chief to take responsibility to clean the Augean stables. Obviously, indeed, the Congolese politico-military landscape needs a complete overhaul.
Throughout our history in recent years, such as mistakes have been made. Believing that we could integrate into an armed force groups of wrongdoers, groups of bandits who have no patriotism and loyalty, and thinking that we can change them simply by integrating them. No, indeed, the army must become an elite corps. The army must become a crucible of patriotism.
The model of the inter-Congolese dialogue of Sun City, which was supposed to bring peace, instead contributed to gathering and absolving all the rebels who betrayed and bloodied the country over the years. It allowed them to be chaotically integrated into the army, the police, and other state bodies. A heterogeneous mix that is not really conducive to creating a homogeneous whole. Some continue to be manipulated by their former master.
But to join the Congolese army from now on, I think certain moral conditions will need to be met. And the people from M23 are not eligible for the army.
In truth, the prevailing corruption contributes to weakening this country and does not currently allow for the creation of a conducive environment for the emergence of a strong army, capable of effectively defending the territory. This has resulted in recruitment under dubious conditions of pseudo-mercenaries who were seen fleeing in disarray before the M23. An absurd situation when considering the amount spent to recruit them. They were picked like ripe fruits upon the arrival of the M23 in Goma. Absolutely pathetic. We will know, I promise you, how much they cost the Congolese taxpayer. One thing is certain, corruption is so entrenched that some Congolese, and not just any, actually have an interest in the chaos persisting. Especially among the corrupt officers who are major mine owners, or who work for the Chinese who are the real masters in Kivu. Behind every Chinese, every Lebanese, in short, every miner hiding in the artisanal sector, there is a deputy, a minister, an army officer, or a politician. It's true that when we were on the ground in the East for the documentary, that we were filming dedicated to the mines of Congo every time we entered a concession. In a mine, the Chinese, the Lebanese, and all the other adventurers found in the DRC, who bypassed all the rules to take over the mines, hurried to call their bigwigs, their protectors in Kinshasa. Some did not hesitate to threaten us by reminding us that they have significant support in the capital, people at the very top who will crush us. During this filming, we had more run-ins with the bigwigs of the regime, the local dignitaries, than with the foreigners. The greatest risks were with the Congolese. In each of the mines that belonged to the Chinese and foreigners, we encountered soldiers who were guarding them, the FARDC. It is even said in Congo that every deputy or politician has their own Chinese. Sometimes I wonder if it's not every Chinese who has their own politician or general. Imagine that some Chinese mines that had been closed by the South Kivu Authority after our denunciation were reopened under pressure from the authorities in Kinshasa, disregarding all regulations. They have nothing to fear from the young governor of South Kivu who, despite his good intentions, seems to have his hands tied. They can pollute without shame and sell their gold without hustle. And they often sell it via Rwanda or directly to China. The urgency for the Congolese, which I don't see manifesting at the moment anyway, is to put aside their differences, their petty local rivalries, their endless struggle for power, to unite behind the most important thing, the integrity of their country. It's time for the youth and the leaders to unite for once, perhaps beyond power sharing, beyond politics, which have shown their limits, in order to rethink their model. As long as they do not make the integrity of their territory a priority, there will always be a space for others to conquer. This is the price of survival for this vast territory, which is nevertheless richly endowed by Mother Nature. It's up to you, the youth, to force them to sit down for the country's interest. A rather striking thing in this fall of Goma is the deafening silence of African nations. If this time some European and even Asian countries condemned the invasion of Goma, even if it was half-heartedly, the silence of African leaders was heavy, burdensome, almost as if they were afraid of reprisals or as if they did not feel concerned. Only actors like South Africa, Angola, and Zimbabwe seem to have taken a stand. The rest of the nations, except those from the Sahel States Alliance, strangely, are nowhere to be found. It's a bit like if your neighbor's house is on fire and you look away. If this is what Pan-Africanism is, I must admit it looks quite weak. I remember the president of Guinea-Bissau, Umaro Sissoco Embalo, then acting president of ECOWAS, taking his plane to go to Ukraine to speak and show his support to his counterpart Zelensky. He also went to Russia, and here, no reaction to the tragedy unfolding in the most important, most promising country in Africa. This sometimes shows how much we lack vision on our continent, a perspective. What is happening in the DRC concerns the entire continent. Beyond the fact that we cannot allow a country to seize the territory of its neighbor without reacting, at the risk of seeing the bigger ones swallow the smaller ones, the DRC, whether we like it or hate it, holds crucial importance for the entire continent. As Frantz Fanon said, Africa is shaped like a revolver, and the DRC is its trigger. The DRC represents a real opportunity for all of Africa, as I have already demonstrated some time ago, through figures and sites in 2 other chronicles that I invite you to watch on our platforms. It is important and it illustrates the urgency to get involved. The title, Who to Save the DRC. You will understand, I am sure, the importance of fighting for stability in this country.
I am Goma.
Thank you for your loyalty to our channel. And above all, don't forget to subscribe to join our community. You are our support and our strength, and to watch all our content in its uncensored version, since YouTube and Facebook sometimes impose restrictions on us. I invite you to join us on our platforms, AFO Media and more. Especially our AFO Media app, where in addition to having the unadulterated version, uncensored version of our content, you have the possibility to download our chronicles, our reports, our documentaries that you can watch even offline. And above all, stay vigilant because despite everything, malicious minds continue to multiply fake AFO Media accounts. Some even use them to carry out sinister scam operations. So be vigilant. I therefore ask you to scan the QR code displayed to join our universe. AFO Media. We are counting on your support and loyalty so that AFO Media can continue to these contents, these reports, these chronicles, these magazines, and to popularize the African narrative without complacency, but without condescension.